and I went down to the baggage claim and I sat down to wait for my bags. And then I just burst into tears and I just started crying. And I was like, oh, I think I'm home. Like, I think I'm home. And I didn't know what to do with that other than be like, oh, maybe I'm allowed to decide.
It can be hard in the midst of so much violence, oppression, and despair to believe in a just, loving, and compassionate world. I'm also clear that if ever we need a collective hold of that possibility, it is now. Mundane Miracles with Sonya Renee Taylor is a podcast where I share stories, reflections, anecdotes, and epiphanies from my daily existence in an effort to collect evidence that life is truly loving and kind, full of intention, guiding us all toward greater love, grace, and compassion, proving that if we learn to look and listen, we will hear and see that life is indeed unfolding for our highest good. Join me as I share evidence that life is happening on purpose with radical love in service of our highest good, even when it sucks, especially when it sucks.
When I let my grief take up all the space of 1,000 oceans that were washing over me every day, I have to say, I felt joy, oh boy, I felt unexpected, unusual, surprising waves of joy.
Hello, and welcome to Mundane Miracles with Sonya Renee Taylor, the podcast where we collect evidence that life is indeed happening on purpose, in radical love, in service of our highest good. Even when it sucks, especially when it sucks. I am your host, Sonya Renee Taylor, and I'm happy to be back with you all. I've missed you. I'm very clear that we need the every other week schedule in order to actually do all the things that happen in life to make this podcast happen. And I miss it when I'm not with you each week. And so I'm just noticing the distinction between wanting to be with you all the time and to take the time it takes to produce this and everybody to live a life that is full of quality and ease and peace and pleasure and joy and all the things that I'm very committed to having being part of my life. Today's episode I am calling Wherever You Go, I'll Go. And it's funny because this is a new piece of evidence that is arising in my life. I just had it sort of come to me the other day, and I started telling a friend about it, and I was like, oh, this is a mundane miracle conversation. And so I'm excited to share it with you all today because it really feels like it is part of this new place of practice that I'm leaning into in my own life, which is a place of practice around trust and trusting that you can't do life wrong. And that feels hard to believe. It feels hard to believe when we look around at the amount of tragedy and violence and pain that we see folks inflicting on others. It feels hard to believe when we look around at the amount of tragedy and violence and pain that we see folks inflicting on themselves. It can feel really difficult to believe that you can't do this wrong, because it feels like you could be doing it very wrong. I think what is always true of all of the messages that I'm sharing in this podcast and in life in general is I am never proposing that I'm telling you the truth. And I think that's really important to remember as we're in this work together. I am never saying I have some sort of corner on what truth is and that I know what truth is. And instead, what I am always offering is a perspective shift. I could be totally wrong. For me, the way that I orient to the messages that come into my life, the stories, the narratives that unfold is, does it give me greater access to peace, power, joy, pleasure, and ease? If I am looking at a situation, a circumstance, and the perspective that I'm taking on it does not give me greater access to peace, power, joy, pleasure, or ease, it might be an invitation to change the narrative. Not because the new narrative is true, just because the old narrative sucks. And so is there a different way to tell the story that is more affirming, that brings you closer to your own personal power? Because guess what? That is truth. The truth is we are inherently powerful. The truth is we are love. And so the question is the story I'm telling myself getting me closer to truth? And if it isn't getting you closer to love and your own power as an expression of love, then it's a shitty story. And here's the invitation to tell a different one. So, when my life had its great collapse, what I'm calling the great collapse of 2020, it really just tanked, right? And it's set me on a particular kind of journey. One that was asking me to listen to the subtle realms, listen to the realms of spirit, listen to the whispers of my ancestors, listen to the stories of the birds and the trees and the grass and the ocean, way more than my deep belief in trying to listen to and understand and extract from other humans. And it set me on this massive adventure that was intense and big and confusing. All of it. It was all of it. But I surrendered. I deeply surrendered. And I said yes. And the truth is, at that point, a lot of my surrender was from fear. It was from the belief that if I didn't surrender, terrible, horrible things would befall me. And so, of course, from that location, I'm like, yeah, what do you need me to do? Sign me up. And so I began listening. I surrendered and I began listening, and the instructions got louder and more specific, and they unfolded. And I remember it was June of 2020, and this journey began in March. And I was in New Zealand. I was in a town called New Plymouth in an area called Taranaki. That's where my Maori whānau hail from. My family, my Maori family in Aotearoa, live in Taranaki. And I had been staying in this massive bed and breakfast, big, 3-story inn with like a giant addition on it that I think at one point was like maybe a nursing home facility or something like that. It had like 27 rooms in it or something. And I was living in it by myself for like a month. And it was definitely haunted, 100%, but beneficent energy. And I was deep into this journey of listening spiritually and following instruction spiritually. And I remember I was standing in the dining room area of this bed and breakfast, and this song came to me, and I just began singing. It also had great acoustics in the dining room area, and so I was giving my full Patti LaBelle vibes at the time. You couldn't tell me I wasn't Whitney Houston. But I began singing, and the song that came through me said, "Wherever you tell me to go, I'll go, I'll go, I'll go. Wherever you tell me to go, I'll go, I'll go, I'll go." And I just started crying, weeping, singing that refrain again and again. And it felt like such a big surrender. It felt like a contract that I was making with spirit. It was a contract I was making with God and my ancestors, that I would surrender my life to this spiritual journey. And I let the song come through me, and I say it felt like a contract, but maybe there was a truth to that on a soul level. But on a conscious level, I didn't think it was anything other than this really touching, beautiful moment. But the truth is, when I say stuff, it be happening. And I'm learning more and more, like, hey, if you say it, it's because obviously that's what's going down, pumpkin. And so I said it. And then within the 2 weeks, I was asked to leave New Zealand. I ended up leaving and going back to the United States in the middle of the pandemic. And it was wild, y'all. Like, traveling at that time, for folks who did not move from where you were at that time, while I was very much in transit, I went to the airport. And this was the first time in my life I could afford to buy my own business class ticket. I went to the airport with my little business class ticket. And the airport looked like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, or whatever the name of that movie was. It was the most dystopic, terrifying visual I'd ever seen. It was bananas. There was no place to sit. Like all the tables in the like food court were like stacked on top of each other. You just kind of had to find a corner. It was empty. It was wild. And I was and I used to jokingly say to friends like, watch, as soon as I get rich, that's when capitalism's going to collapse. And it really looked like that. It really did look like it was dystopic and dark and twisted. It looked really scary. But I'd said I would go. And so off I went. I was all over the place. I was in California. I went to Mount Shasta. And I didn't know why I was going where I was going. I didn't understand the journey or why I was taking this journey. I didn't know. I just knew that I said I would. I also felt like if I didn't go, bad things would happen, because when I didn't listen before, bad things that happened. And so I really was orienting to my life from this yes, but underneath it was this foundation of fear. And so I began traveling that summer all the way until February of 2021. And, you know, I ended up being in Hawaii. That's when I got COVID for the first time. It was a lot. Buy Back Black debt happened during that time. We paid off $500,000 of Black folks' debt through white wealth transfer. I lost some relationships that meant a lot to me, just on a journey. And then I came back. I ended up getting my permanent residency in New Zealand, and I went back. And I went back to New Zealand, and I lived there for another year, another like 14 months, and went through another round of like deep isolation and disconnection and massive lessons and all kinds of things. And then I was told to go again. And this time, the way I was told to go, I didn't think I was leaving. I thought I was coming to the U.S. to go on tour, to do some speaking engagements for like 5 weeks. That's what I thought was happening. I have not been back to New Zealand since. And I feel like I've mentioned this, or I've seeded this particular story, which may be the next episode. I think I'll just tell this next story. The lead up to being kicked out of New Zealand. I'll share that, I think, in the next episode, perhaps. That was April of 2022. And I've not been back to Aotearoa since, which is both so tender for me and also just what it was. But when I left, I began a journey that lasted almost 3 years without a home, without living in a home. I went to Peru during that time. I went to Colombia during that time. I went to Costa Rica during that time. I went to Morocco during that time. I went to Ecuador during that time. I was all over the United States during that time. I went to Senegal during that time. I went to Mexico during that time. I really made my way to various parts of the planet. And I didn't always know why I was going or what was happening. I lamented many times during that journey about not having a house and being so tired and wanting a closet. Like, I just want a bed and a closet. I just want a place that's mine. And I really felt like I didn't have an option. You know, by this time, the bliss of my spiritual awakening had come and gone and come again and gone again. And there were times when it felt like the most beautiful, miraculous, incredible experience ever. And then there were times when it felt like I was absolutely being punished by the universe. And I was tired, but I was afraid that if I didn't listen, that terrible things would happen to me and that I would be disobeying this contract that I said when I said, wherever you tell me to go, I'll go. And that by disobeying the contract, some tragedy would befall me if I didn't do it right. And then I had been coming back and forth. One of sort of my touchstones during that time was Durham, North Carolina. I was working on a project with Adrienne Marie Brown here, the Institute of Radical Permission. And she was here, and lots of other people that I cared about were here. And I was like, word, okay, this is more of what it is that I want, like community. And I still didn't feel like I was given permission to land in a house. But I would come back and I would house sit for Adrian, and I would get an Airbnb, and I would come back and I would do this, and I'd come back and I'd do this. And I sort of allowed myself to be in this back and forth. And it was sometime during the summer of 2024, this summer. I want to say it was June. I was leaving Ecuador, whereas another place I'd been spending a lot of time that was feeling deeply nourishing for me. And then I flew back from wherever I'd been, and I landed at the Durham airport, and I went down to the baggage claim, and I sat down to wait for my bags. And then I just burst into tears, and I just started crying. And I was like, oh, I think I'm home. Like, I think I'm home. And I didn't know what to do with that other than be like, oh, maybe I'm allowed to decide. Maybe I'm allowed to choose. Like, I'm allowed to choose that I could just stay here, right? And that was the beginning of me looking for a place to call home, to a new home, a new house, a bed, and a closet. But I was still very afraid. I was afraid that I wasn't going to be allowed to have home. And that's a really old story for me. Talk a little astrology. So my Chiron is the wounded healer. In mythology, Chiron was born half human, half god, and wasn't wanted by his mother or his godly father. Was sent to be raised with the centaurs and had really profound gifts of healing and deep intelligence around healing. In play with the centaurs, Chiron was wounded in a way that would have been a mortal wound if Chiron were all mortal. But because Chiron was half god, he couldn't die, which meant that he just had to live with this immeasurable pain for eternity. But because he was such a brilliant healer and he'd spent so much time trying to learn to heal and work with this wound, that he ended up creating incredible healing modalities for so many others because of that effort of trying to work with his own wound. And ultimately, he was ultimately allowed to die and I think traded places with, I don't know, I'm not that great of a mythology student, but eventually was allowed to be free of his suffering. But in astrology, Chiron represents our wounded healer. It is the place in us that remains tender, that is the wound that doesn't heal, but by our learning to be with it, but by our learning to really tenderly hold and work with this wound, we become agents of healing for others. It becomes a tremendous act of service. And Chiron is one of the two rulers of the sign Virgo. And Virgo is ruled by the planet Mercury and by the asteroid Chiron. And, Virgo is service, right? And it is to be of service through its aptitude for detail, its attention to detail, its ability to look at a thing in the smallest, most minute ways and then offer it care, support, healing, tending to be of service to it. And Chiron, in my birth chart, it's in the 4th house, which is the house of our roots, home. It represents the location of home, our family, our parents, our mothers and fathers, sometimes grandparents, where we grew up. I often correlate it with the root chakra in chakra science. It's what grounds us. It's the location of grounding. That's where my core wound is. And it's in the sign Aries. And what I have learned as I've worked with this particular astrological placement, right? Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It really represents the inception of a thing, the starting point of a thing. It also represents the self, our relationship to our own selves, our bodies, our identities. And it's go energy. It's ruled by the planet Mars. And so how do I go? What motivates me? And the search for home has always been a thing that motivates me. And because Aries is also the energy of beginning again and again and again and again, It means I have moved again and again and again and again for most of my life. You know, I was born to a father in the military. We moved a lot. I don't think I've ever lived in any one house for longer than 24 months, with the exception of my grandmother's house. My grandmother's house is the longest I ever lived in one house. And I lived there from 5th grade to 9th grade. So all of 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Yeah, for 4 years I lived with my grandmother in the same house, which would be the longest that I've ever lived in one location. So that moving and that beginning again is the energy of my experience of home. The energy of my experience of home is also one of, you know, a family impacted by addiction and having to leave the care of my mother to go live with my grandmother because of addiction. And so there has always been a sense of instability around home for me. And also a deep longing for home. A deep longing for home. And it is the place in my life where I have felt the most abandoned by God. Is the story that's lived in that. That I'm not allowed to have home. That I'm not allowed to have stable care. That the foundation of my life will always be fractured and disrupted and experience upheaval. Right? These are the stories I've been telling myself. And as you might notice, they do not feature a lot of peace, power, joy, pleasure, or ease. And so it's really been some work to shift the narrative, to get a different story. I have worked and worked and worked and worked and worked with this particular wound to find a new location, a new way of being with it. And so when I was in that airport and I was like, oh, this is home, there was a choosing. There was a saying yes to something that felt really scary, that felt like, but you're not allowed to have this, Sonya. And so what are you doing? Because you're not allowed to have this. And, you know, I really had to say to myself, what if you are, right? What if you are allowed to have this? And maybe you won't be punished for deciding you want something. It's like, oh, well, since I'm not allowed to have it and I've never had it, it must mean that I shouldn't want it. And my job is to just teach myself not to want this thing, which wasn't working because I really wanted it, because it's the thing that's part of my heart's desire. You know, and like, to be clear, there is that story of my immediate life, but also placed inside of the context of being born a Black woman in America, to be tied to an epigenetic lineage of displacement, of having home ripped away via trauma, and then trying to figure out how to make new experience of home elsewhere. So much of my life and so much of my ancestors' lives have been inside of that story. So I let myself want a home, and then I went about the business of finding it with my roommate Malachi, and we ended up in a new place. We got a place, and it's been amazing. And you know, one of the things that I was allowing myself to do as part of my homemaking experience was to really dive into decorating, to just let myself have the flyest, cutest, most delicious place I could. And so I did. I let myself really deep dive into decorating. I found all kinds of fly things, and I asked my community to send me artwork, and we painted walls, and we bought wallpaper, and we bought plants, and I really let myself live into my creative and artistic expression of placemaking and homemaking. And I found these 2 pieces of art in a thrift store, and they are 2 long horizontal rectangular frames that have what I believe is a biblical quote on it. And the first one says, wherever you go, I'll go. And then the second one says, wherever you stay, I'll stay. And it's Ruth 1:16. I believe it's a biblical verse. And when I first saw it, it reminded me of the song that I sang in the bed and breakfast in New Zealand in June of 2020, when I said, wherever you tell me to go, I'll go, I'll go. And wherever you tell me to go, I'll go. And in something inside of that song, I made it fit with my story, the story that I couldn't have home. And so consequently, I needed to go wherever I was told to go. And there's something really necessary and essential about this journey that I've been on, because Aries, remember, is the self. The zodiac sign Aries is the self, and mine is in the fourth house, the house of home. And there is part of a lesson that I was am being taught, that is, I am my own home. I am home. Not a place, not a person, not a thing, but me. But my very beingness is home. And can I be home wherever I am? Right? An important part of that lesson. But part of what was happening inside of my journey around home and staying and going was I had forgotten that in the experience, the lesson of understanding myself as my own home, was that I had forgotten that the reason I am my own home is because I am separate from nothing. I am my own home because I am the divine, and the divine is everywhere. I am a unique and powerful expression of God and cannot be separated from that. And that is home. And so wherever I am in connection to that truth, I am home. Wherever it is. But I was relating to the divine, to the experience of the most sacred as a thing outside of me, and a thing that was going to punish me if I got it wrong, if I didn't listen and follow the instructions. And so, my job was to do this thing that this big outside of me God told me to do. And even as I moved into this new house and let myself have this experience of like wanting home and being home, I was holding it like, well, maybe I'll decorate it and I'll never get to see it again. Who knows? Like maybe I will get to play in this space, but I won't get to live in it because I'm not supposed to have home, and because wherever I'm told to go, I'll go. I'm not allowed to have this thing. I'm not allowed to want, and my job is to make it so that I just don't want it. And I recently took a trip to Costa Rica. So I left home, my new place, that I had just, spent 2 months deep diving into decorating and making beautiful. And my roommate and I threw a house party on a Sunday. And on a Wednesday morning, I flew away for what I thought would be months. And I didn't know when I would be home again. And I was telling myself this story that, don't get too attached, Sonya. This isn't a thing you really get to have. And there's a truth to the don't get too attached. Be clear. There is a wisdom in that I am learning more and more and more. But beyond that, there's also a story that doesn't give me access to peace, power, joy, pleasure, and ease, which is the story that I'm not allowed to have what I want, that I can't trust what I want. And so I found myself in Costa Rica. I had a beautiful trip. I'm visiting a land project there called Brave Earth, a Tierra Valiente, put together by some beautiful folks who are really visioning how we might live differently, how we might be more intentional stewards of one another, of land, of earth, all of that. And I had a beautiful time there. And then I found myself with 2 weeks before I needed to be in my next location, which was Ecuador. And I was going to go to Colombia because I have one of my besties, Maureen Benson, lives in Colombia. And I was going to go there. And I bought my ticket and I was like, all right, I'm going to go spend 14 days in Colombia. And I was sitting in meditation one morning and I saw my bedroom, which has black walls and this massive wallpaper of a peony unfolding. And it really looks like I'm sleeping in the center of a flower in the middle of the universe, is what it looks like in my bedroom. And I saw it in the meditation. And then I said, I want to go home. And I could feel the trepidation, the fear, the nervousness that, am I allowed to go home? But I told God I would go wherever I was told to go. Do I get to say so? And I thought about it, and it felt so foreign to just want something and say yes to it. But I did. I said, I want to go home. And then I booked a ticket. And I said, if I have 14 days free, I'm going to go home. And I came home. I'm recording this podcast from my roommate's bedroom at home, y'all. And I was so nervous and so proud of myself. It felt so big after years and years and years of being blown like a leaf in the wind to wherever it is that I felt spirit and my ancestors were telling me to go. It felt so wild to say, but I want something and I'm going to do it. And then I sat down in my office / spirit room / guest room. All the things happened there. And I looked at the artwork that I had bought from the thrift store that is hanging on my wall. And it says, wherever you go, I'll go. And wherever you stay, I'll stay. And I realized I'd been telling myself the story of those two statements from the wrong direction. It was me telling God, wherever you go, I'll go, and wherever you stay, I'll stay. But that's not what that means. It was actually God telling me, wherever you go, I'll go, and wherever you stay, I'll stay. Because the divine is everywhere. I can't be separated from it. So wherever it is I go, there is the divine with me. And wherever it is I stay, there is the divine with me. And then there's another painting that I got at a thrift store that I put in between them, and it said, you are exactly where you need to be. And I realized that I cannot be separated from the love of God. I realized that I get a say-so in where I want to be. And wherever it is I say, there too dwells the divine. There too dwells the sacred. There too dwells my ancestors. I can't be separated from them, and they can't be separated from me, and I can't be separated from God, and God can't be separated from me, and I can't be separated from life, and life can't be separated from me, which means that whatever I choose, life says, I'll go. Which meant that I could come home. And guess what? God was like, word, then let's go home. And all of a sudden I understood that I'm at choice. And that I don't have to be afraid that I'm going to upset an angry, wrathful God who will punish me for not doing exactly what it was I was told to do. But instead, that God, that life, the divine, however you want to language it, is like, I'm co-creating with you. And so you get to create. And I'll be with you. Wherever it is you decide to create, Sonya. Because I am you. Because we're inseparable. And what a gift it was, to be not separate. To be not separate. To not have to endlessly search for home or fear that it's leaving me. That it is wherever I am. And that I get to choose where I want to be. And there too dwells the divine. We get to choose. And whatever we choose doesn't separate us from the love of God. Which means doesn't separate us from love. Doesn't separate us from life. As long as we know it. As long as we know, oh, you're here too. Oh, you're here too. Oh, you're here too. It's been a miracle to get to experience that. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope that you will find the divine in every place you put your breath. every location it is that you decide to endeavor toward and to. May divinity and grace, power and love, peace, pleasure, joy, and ease find you. And may you know that it's your birthright to have it wherever you are. Thank you for tuning in. I look forward to spending time with you all again in a couple of weeks. Again, maybe it'll be the story of being kicked out of Aotearoa. In the meantime, I hope you'll do all the things. You'll make listening a ritual. You'll make sharing a ritual. You'll make subscribing a ritual. You will make this sacred time that we get to spend together part of your own sacred work toward being more fully embodied in the miracle that is life, and looking to find evidence every day that it's happening on purpose with radical love in service of our highest good. Even when it sucks, especially when it sucks. Have a great week. Mwah.
You think you are dying, but you are being born.
Mundane Miracles with Sonya Renee Taylor is produced by Sonya Renee Taylor, edited by Dr. Shannon Weber. Our opening music is Joy and Grief by Sean and Abigail Bingson of the Bingsons. Our closing song is Dying by the Bingsons. Join us in the ritual of collecting evidence by rating, commenting, and subscribing to Mundane Miracles on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can get early access to episodes and support our radical love work by becoming a member on Patreon at patreon.com/Sonya Renee Taylor. That's patreon.com/Sonya Renee Taylor.